That is good or it's not good? Okay. So this is the third lecture of the series called Pearl Harbor, Hiroshima, and the Jews' remarkable yet unknown chapter in American history. Tonight is the third lecture, which is, as you can see, is called No End in Sight, Pearl Harbor and the Bloody Conflict in the Pacific, 41 to 45, the Jewish Angle. Tonight, sponsored by my good friends at HRS Flooring and at the fellows from the Monday morning alumnus class that we do over here. I want to give greetings to everybody, especially to Mark Hart, who's here tonight. He was kind enough to tell me he had nothing better to do, therefore he came. Always appreciate it. Yeah, and keeps me normal. Now, as I was saying, we're picking up from where we left off the other day, obviously, and that leads me, without any further ado, to plunge into this and to say that we're looking at the year 1940, and one of the big themes of this whole series, and certainly tonight, next week, is obtuseness, which is a major factor in international relations, usually a function of culture, and misunderstandings based on that. And the Japanese obtuseness is remarkable, although we had our share. And I'll tell you where I'm going with this. And by 1940, a particularly obtuse Japan is trying to figure out how to make hay during this new Second World War that just broke that they had nothing to do with in Europe, in the same way that they made gains during the First World War, if not greater, if not higher. And so let's take a look at our first one here. The existential problem of Japan is they're an island without resources. Keep that in mind. And they have to import everything. And so let's put it this way. Japan picked up a bunch of islands as a result of participating in the First World War, and they patted themselves on the back for why not. So they figured, as the Second World War, what I'm trying to say is they didn't look at it like, you're Jewish, the Second World War is Hitler, it's unique, it's the Holocaust, it's this, that, and the other. What if you're not Jewish? You have a different angle on it, a vision. And even Japan and these other countries trying to expand, because that's what they did. You're saying, how can we chaperone, as they say, and profit by this quarrel that's occurring in Europe? And as I said before, they're an island with no resources. They still are. And they have to import everything, which is a tremendous weakness in terms of your national strength. And how do you remedy it? Meaning, how do you become non-dependent on other countries? So you can't help, if you're Japanese, but look at the map and figure like this. If Germany totally defeats France, Japan could take Indochina right there. So that would be a big chunk, and again, China's got a lot of resources. If Hitler totally defeats the Dutch, Japan can take Indonesia. Yeah. Oops. But they used to call the Dutch East Indies at that time, before. But you and I call today Indonesia. That's a lot of territory, let's put it this way. These territories are gigantic and they're packed with raw materials, which Japan lacked. I mean, they have everything. If Hitler goes ahead and actually defeats Britain, oh my goodness, Japan might be able to take this. India, Burma, Malaya, Singapore, Pakistan, the sky's the limit. And, that's, oh my God. Japan, in that scenario, which by the way was not far-fetched, because France did go down. The Dutch did go down. And the British, if left on their own, without the American intervention, did go down. There's no question if it would be a war just between Japan and Britain in the Far East, Britain doesn't have a chance. So it's there for the taking, so to speak. If that happens, the Japanese dream, then we would be strong enough that we couldn't be taken on by America or Russia. If we organize this right, in such a way that's part of a successful arrangement, a successful empire, then Japan will really be a world power. Of course, America and Russia will try to block it, but maybe they figure maybe some way can be found. In Yiddish, we call this Kreuz Eigen. You understand? Yeah, okay? So there's the Japanese imagining they'll take this and they'll take this, and as you would know, in the World War II, they did it. But the question is, how do you do it without provoking war with the U.S. or Russia? That's the trick. Every statesman in the world, including Hitler, wanted to get away with getting stuff for free. That's the best, okay? Little by little, Hirohito, the emperor, and his military leaders conclude it's not likely that they're going to get for free without a fight. On the other hand, they, Cheshbon, If they do conquer all these vast and rich Asian territories, and if they can defeat the American Navy at sea, then America would have to do like Russia in 1905 and leave Japan with Korea. In other words, Russia had a big war. The Japs were able to wipe out their fleets because they had the best navy, and they practiced, and they did level the Russian fleets. Theoretically, Russia could go to war forever, but it's not likely. And so I'm talking the way they saw it. You know, they'll have a big battle at sea, they'll destroy the American Navy, and then what are we going to do? Rebuild a whole new Navy, draft another 20 million. America will say, forget about it. What did Russia do? They said, take Korea. So America will say, take the Far East. After all, it wasn't really a great loss to Russia that they didn't get Korea. So it would not be a great loss to America if they don't hold on to, you know, Indonesia and all these faraway places. That's what they thought. The trouble is, they were at the wrong time in the wrong place. They picked on the wrong president. Happened to be Roosevelt, as you know, was, in my opinion, the most powerful and certainly the most popular president in American history. I'll say it again. He was the most powerful, maybe the most effective in terms of political power, and certainly the most popular in American history. Many of us now know people who are anti-Roosevelt, like Rabbi Herzberg. But the great majority of the country was pro-Roosevelt. You don't need me to tell you, he won 4 times with big majorities each time. The smallest majority he had with 44 was 2.5 million. Boy, would Hillary or Trump like to get 2.5 million majority, right? It's more like 2.5 people, you see? So the Japanese were at the wrong, you know, they weren't dealing with, you know, I don't know which president you wish. Roosevelt was determined not to let the Japanese gain so much. That's just who he was. And so, as the 30s proceed, he had already made it clear there was a commercial treaty that we had signed with the Japanese back in 1911, but it ran out in 1939. That gave them most favored nation status. Each side could trade a lot with the other without any restrictions. When it ran out in 39, Roosevelt said like this, we simply exercise our option, we're not going to renew. We don't have to. And that means that we don't have to sell you anything if we don't want to, which in effect meant that the power was in the hands of FDR if he wanted to embargo them if he feels like it. And they understood what's going on. So this is what we call the deployment of soft power. You get it? Which sometimes can be more powerful than hard. In June of 1940, as we know, to the shock of the world, France collapsed. Here's the German army, as we all know, marching in. Okay, I'll turn the sound off. And think if you're sitting in Tokyo watching this. That's the point I want to get across, right? If you're Tojo or Hirohito or one of these other guys, and the great and powerful France just went down the tubes in a month, as we all know happened with the Blitzkrieg. This is a game changer, and you can understand that they would think, you know, Hitler's going to win the war. You know, I don't know if he's going to wipe out everybody. He's going to win. There will be a peace, and Germany will come out ahead. And just as in the First World War, we were on the side that won, and we got something out of it, same thing now. And so what Japan did as a result of this was they immediately occupied Indochina, what we call today Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos. They just moved to India because the French had been smashed, and the French garrison in Indochina was small, and therefore the Japanese were able to take it over. That was a red flag for Roosevelt. He said, the heck with that. And so he said, I guess, I'm exercising my option, and I'm embargoing scrap metal, all the airplane stuff, and all the other type of material you need for weapons. The Japanese used to import, they had to import everything actually, a ton of scrap metal, which they used for their battleships, their airplanes, and all the other business. I myself know 1 or 2 people, maybe you do, who way back then were in the scrap metal business, who actually did very well back in the 30s. You know, it was 100% legal back in the 30s, because whatever you got in your stock, you could always sell to the Japanese. And all of a sudden, not. So this was a big shock for Japan. Now, this was a election year, 1940. Roosevelt was running for the 3rd time, which was controversial, as I'm sure you can imagine. And during the election year, he didn't want to push it too far. But once he got reelected, there's a different story. He was less reluctant to enter the war. Although he didn't want to enter the war if the country was divided, which just goes to show you how smart he was, because you and I have lived through times when this country has gone into the war divided, like in Vietnam. It was a mess. We don't do well with that. And at that time, you know, Charles Lindbergh and all the other guys like that were all saying, stay out of the war. It's all a Jewish plot. It's a British plot. famous speech where he said there are three groups that try to drag America into war: the British, the Jews, and the Roosevelt administration. You can get it online if you want. And so Roosevelt wasn't going into the war like that. But on the other hand, in July of 41, middle of the year, the Japs pour 100,000 soldiers into Indochina. Now, why are they going to do that? Let's go to the map again. There is Indochina. If you have an extra large army over here, you can go to Indonesia where you have all the oil. Here in Indochina you have the rubber, which is absolutely essential for your military. Okay, you can't run a war without things like rubber. We don't. I know you and I don't think like that because we're not in the military sort of things. This country had a big problem in World War II, a big problem because we didn't have access to the rubber, and they had to invent the synthetic rubber. And Chaim Weizmann actually played a role in that, believe it or not, when he was a scientist here in this country in the Second World War, and people like that. If they didn't do that, we couldn't fight the war. I'm just trying to tell you, it's not like the movies, where you see John Wayne or something like that. It's stupid little things like nickel and rubber and this kind of oil and whatever. And the Japanese were taking this. So anyway, it looks like they're going to take Indonesia. What to do? By this time, Roosevelt, and the urging of Morgenthau, who, as I told you before, saw black and white. He saw the Japanese as anti-Semitic. He saw the Japanese as partners with Hitler. He saw the Japanese as a mortal threat to the United States of America. And he's being pushed even more by Harry Dexter White, who's at his urging, when the Japanese reinforce Indochina, Roosevelt freezes all the money, all the Japanese and Chinese money. You know what that means? You can't touch the money you have in the banks. If the Japanese have money in this country in the bank, they can't touch it. Like we did not long ago to Iran until we didn't. And the Japs were hit very hard in the pocketbook. This is a devastating use of soft power, as they say today. And on August the 1st, 2 weeks later, FDR embargoed the oil. Japan doesn't have oil. They got 80%, maybe 85% of oil from this country. People may not know that, but once upon a time, we were the major oil producers in the world. Okay, not the Arabs. It was around this time that the Americans made contact with the Saudi Arabians. But this country, in places like Oklahoma and Texas and I don't know where, they had a ton of oil. And all of a sudden, Roosevelt saw like you can't get any oil. And it's 1941. Where the Japanese going to get the oil from? They can't. And so what I'm trying to tell you is like this. When he did, he put a squeeze on their neck. And it couldn't stay like that. You understand? That's this intolerable situation. It's like somebody would cut off food, I don't know, to a country. What are you going to do? Now, let's look at the different set of Japanese options. They could fight Russia. Let's go to the map. Russia's next door, and Russia's always a threat. Look how close Russia. People don't realize this is Vladivostok. Look how close Russia is to Japan. And after all, if Hitler declared war on Russia in June of 1941. If the Japanese join on the attack of Russia, they could take Siberia, remove the threat to Manchuria, and lock in their control of China. These are gargantuan territories. I mean, you talk about Siberia and all this kind of stuff. That was a temptation. That's what the army wanted to do. In Japan, it's all about culture. The army came from a certain class and from certain shvatim, certain tribes. I mean, listen, I'm not Japanese, you're not Japanese, but you get the general idea what I'm talking about. There are really different tribes that make up the nation of Japan. And it's just very interesting. I became very, very tribalistic. And the army came from one class, usually the lower middle class, with shall I say, a very narrow cultural background, not much education, no international experience. Therefore, they're very narrow and chauvinistic. The Navy, which usually came from the upper classes, the upper middle class, and the aristocracy. Isn't that interesting? And they naturally, being Navy officers, went around the world, so they had a broader view, so they saw things differently. And the Army wants to go in against Russia because they said, look how close they are, the threat to us. The Navy said, no, let's go after the resource-rich and poorly defended South. The Dutch can't hold Indonesia. The Dutch have been wiped out by Hitler. The French can't hold Indochina. The French have been wiped out by Hitler. The British are on the ropes. If we go after India or Malaya or one of these places, they can't. If we go after Singapore, what are they going to do? What are they going to do? At the time I'm talking about, Churchill was basically hanging on in England. The Blitz. They had nothing, right? And how are you going to do it? So if we take these territories, we instantly get the rubber, the oil, the food, all the kind of resources that we need to maintain ourselves. It's easier to take on the Dutch than the Red Army, agreed? So the big question then is, what will America do? And America, as we know, at the time I'm talking about, is now economically pressing Japan. And pressing them like this, like a person with a stomach ache that can't take any pressure on the stomach. That's where Japan was at that time. It hurt too much. Now, America's attitude, Cordell Hull, the Secretary of State, Roosevelt and Morgenthau was, we didn't start this, you guys started it. We were just regular relations with you. You started teaming up with Hitler, occupying this territory, doing all that. Unilateralism breeds unilateralism. It's not our fault, okay? There's the famous Secretary of State, that's exactly what he told him. Well, it's tricky because, on the other hand, the Army under General Marshall, you've heard of General Marshall, was in the process of creating an American Army. When World War II started, the United States Army was 160,000. You hear what I said? The ganze Army with the Air Force together was like 160,000. That's smaller than Switzerland or something, you know. And a lot of the Army was what you call deadwood, you know, overaged officers from the cavalry times. And so, no, I'm serious. And so, believe me, when FDR appointed Marshall, he jumped him over a whole bunch of other generals. And the first thing he said was, get rid of the deadwood, fire everybody. You know, Marshall did. So Marshall said like this, it's only a year I'm in, or 2 years. Don't provoke Japan at this time. We're not ready yet. FDR had undertaken a massive buildup in mid-1940. When the French fell, and it looked like England would go down the tubes, Roosevelt, in the middle of election campaign, started a draft, started spending billions and zillions like they never did before. And that's what ended the Depression. I know we all know this from the high school, right? And when the government started pouring serious money all across the country, and all of a sudden everybody had jobs creating this weapons junk that they had didn't have before, then it was like crazy. And so let's put it this way: it's middle or late 41. Roosevelt's already growing more reckless. It's not like we were 2 years ago. We have an Air Force. It's not an Air Force as big as it could be, but it's going to be bigger. We have a Navy. We have an Army. You know, there was a draft. The Army was up to close to 1 million. And that's with all the draft deferments. So which way is it going to go? The Japanese, I'm talking about August, September, October, November, December of 41, start freaking out slowly because where are they going to go? Earlier that year, they had concluded a non-aggression, 5-year non-aggression treaty with Stalin in April 1941, just before Hitler invaded Russia. Look how everybody loves each other. Okay? You understand? And Stalin put on a smile. Now, the Japs didn't realize that they were being sold, that they were stupid. You understand? They thought they were being clever. Stalin was running rings around them because he was always smarter than anybody else in the room. They shouldn't have signed an aggression treaty with it. They should have attacked together. From their point of view, they should have attacked together with Hitler. You understand? But all during the Second World War, there was a special non-aggression treaty between Russia and Japan next door, which drove the Americans crazy. And I'll tell you why. We couldn't win the war unless you bombed Japan. It took us 3 years to get close to be able to bomb Japan. We're too far away. Russia's next door. From Vladivostok to Tokyo, it's close. You understand? And the other islands. Just let us in. And Stalin said, no, we have a 5-year non-aggression treaty with them. So I guess from the Japanese point of view, it makes sort of a sense. So let's look at it now from Tokyo's point of view. Japan has treaties with Germany, with Italy, and now with Russia. The only one they don't have a treaty with is the U.S. Okay? And England doesn't even count because they're weak. In Washington, D.C., Morgenthau, Harry Dexter White and all were saying like this, play hardball. Don't let Japanese get away with anything. Don't stop embargoing the oil. Don't stop embargoing the scrap metal. And force them to buckle. You understand? Use our embargo power to force them to give in to us. Insist on a total Japanese withdrawal from everything since 1931. Manchuria, China, Indochina. Insist that Japan breaks the Axis Treaty with Germany and Italy. And if Japan does that, then America will lift the embargoes. Now, I get it, and it kind of makes sense to me, but what if you're Japanese? You understand? Stanley Horbuck was let's go back one. Was the State Department guy in charge of the Far East, of the Asian affairs. And his deputy was a Harry Dexter White type of guy, Duggan, who was a communist spy. It's interesting. So you have a whole situation. It's more than just a communist spy. America, so like this, we got the Japanese where we want them. Although they didn't think, these guys, or they didn't care, sometimes if you threaten somebody too much, they might pull a gun on you. Okay? So what I'm trying to say is, it's not that Pearl Harbor came out of nowhere. Agreed? This is the situation that was going at that time. They're pushing it. Now, there was an opposite end of the spectrum politically in America. They looked at things very differently. And they were led by people like Hoover, who was out of office and was a nobody in public opinion. And they said like this, don't go to war with Japan, it's not necessary. Japanese don't want to go to war with us, we don't want to go to war with Japan. There are issues about the land they occupied, all the rest of it. We can work on it. We do have certain leverage over them with the economics, that's true. Don't try to rub their noses in it, because no country takes that, especially an Asian country. You know what I mean? They'll lose face and all that. Work with this in the spirit of Teddy Roosevelt. You get it? And Teddy Roosevelt, even though he had a big image, like, you know, speak softly, carry a big stick, really spoke softly, didn't carry a stick. Okay? And I told you the other day, you know, he said, let's be realistic over there. The Catholics in America were pro-Hoover. I'll tell you why. The Catholics saw it like I was saying yesterday. The problem is Stalin, not Japan. If we have a war with America and with the U.S. and Japan, the winner is Russia. Who wants that? Okay? So the Catholic Church, quietly, behind the scenes, you know, was very nervous. And what's really interesting to me is one of the leading Jews in America, we've encountered here in the past, Louis Strauss, was also part of this. For those who don't remember, Louis Strauss was a Jewish millionaire, a guy from Charleston, West Virginia, a German Jewish family, you know, born in the late 1800s, who came from a very religious reform family, let's put it that way. Not the father, but the mother. He grew up in Richmond. And, you know, I don't have to tell you, in the South, they take religion seriously. And 100 years ago, they took religion really seriously. So if you're Jewish, even reform or anything like that, you're supposed to take it very seriously. His mother was like that. And he grew up a good Jewish boy in that context. It's very interesting, very, very interesting autobiography, very interesting autobiography. And Men and Decisions. And he grew up, as I say, in Richmond. And his father had a shoe business. And when he graduated from high school, he wanted to go to college. He actually liked science. But this is years ago. The father said, I guess, you can't have luxury of going to college. That's ridiculous. You're joining the business. You know, we need you in the business for a salesman. It's the golden age 100 years ago, the Jewish salesman in the South. I'm sure many of us know people like that. Once upon a time, all the South was full of Jewish salesmen going up and down. I do mean that because every town had a Jewish store or two, and that was the retail. And he writes all about it. He said, you know, so think about 1912, 1913, 1914, those years. And this guy's 18, 17, 18 years old. He drives around with the car up Virginia, down Virginia, up North Carolina, South Carolina, all over the place. And he was a very diligent boy, although he says he always made sure on Friday night to be in the hotel to read his prayers. You see? He's a good Reformed Jew. And he put together $20,000 by 1917. Okay, when he was 20 years old, something like that. That's a lot of money in those days. I mean, he really was diligent. And then World War I breaks out. And he had had a fight with some Gentile kids, and they ruined one of his eyes. So he couldn't go in the army when he was young. And to make a long story short, he goes to Washington, D.C., where he hears about a guy named Herbert Hoover, who had become famous for supplying food for the Belgians before America got in the war. And it was world famous, actually. And when World War I broke out, Woodrow Wilson made Herbert Hoover the czar of all the food. He's the boss of all the farms. And this guy came to see him. And Hoover was not a Jew lover, but he said like this, I came to work for you, and I work for free. And Hoover said, if you work for free, I'll give you a shot. And by a quirk of fate, piece of luck, the main secretary had to quit or something. I forget exactly what happened. And the job opened up. And here this guy was like 18 years old. And he's the right-hand man of Herbert Hoover. And that took him to the top of the World War I and to the Versailles Treaty after World War I when he goes to Europe. And he's negotiating with Lenin and all alongside Hoover. It's a remarkable story for a guy who never went to college. And he's doing international loans, or whatever. And by the way, he goes to synagogue every Friday night, makes a point of saying it. And when he's up there with all the world leaders, with Wilson and Lloyd George and all that stuff, so there are a bunch of bankers also attending the Versailles conference, and one of them is from Schiff's firm, Kuhn Loeb, and he says, I see what you got. You come and join my firm, and eventually marries the guy's daughter. So it became a millionaire in the Wall Street and the bond market. It's called a merit appointment, and but actually came in under merit appointment. Just later married the boss's daughter, and so next thing you know, he's a millionaire, living in New York, president of the Reform Temple, head of the Reform Jewish Association, whatever they call it, the Hebrew Union of Congregations or whatever the term was, the lay one, and a big macher in the American Jewish Committee and all this sort of thing. The guy never went to college. Now, what happens is that he's together with Herbert Hoover, although he didn't have a position in his administration because he was busy making money on Wall Street. And then comes the 1930s, and he's one of these Jews who's very anti-Zionist because he's a strong Reform Jew of the old school. Very strong anti-Zionist. So therefore, him and Bernard Baruch, they're looking for places to stick the Jews. Not Manchuria, like I said the other day, because it's Japanese, but maybe Africa, maybe the Amazon jungle. Remember Tijuana we talked about once? There was all kind of possibilities or suggestions out there. And in the course of his doings, let's put it this way, he was approached by a couple of priests from a new American Catholic group, the Maryknoll Brothers. Maybe you've heard of them. That's an American group. And they said like this. They said, with the Depression, all the rest of it, our finances are disorganized. So you go to a Jewish guy, can you fix up, for the Galachim, can you fix up all the finances? And he does do it, and becomes friends with these Catholic guys. And in return, but this is very typical, Strauss was a very interesting behind-the-scenes guy. In return, the head guy of their Father Drought, who was, the priest, he helped behind the scenes get rid of Father Coughlin. You understand? So, because it was a tricky business. Coughlin was like a Rush Limbaugh was anti-Semitic. Rush Limbaugh is not anti-Semitic, but imagine if he was. With that following, it was very bad. And so this is very very typical of the group I'm talking about, which is you do things behind the doors. Anyhow, so this guy Louis Strauss was, I remind you, in the Jacob Schiff firm. Did he go to Japan? You bet. Did they have business with the Japanese government all these years? You bet. Does he know all the Japanese big shots and machers? You bet. Has he met with the Emperor Hirohito and all this kind of stuff? He's from Schiff. No, I'm serious. You understand? So in other words, people that like this don't look at it like in the movies, the Japanese, and then, he was thinking, why we're doing good business with them. Why is America going to war over this stuff? Maybe we can negotiate some way out of this. And these Catholics approach him, and they say, between you and us, maybe we can help the situation and avert a war. They want to negotiate with the Japanese in the spirit of Teddy Roosevelt, as they said it. The Japanese were interested. The Japanese admit to Strauss and to the Catholic priests, including this guy Bishop Walsh, who was a famous guy imprisoned by Mao Zedong later on. They admit, they say, we've gone too far. You understand? In other words, what people say in front is not what you say behind doors to your bankers and others. When Strauss and the other guy got in the room and said, all right, let's cut the baloney, nobody's watching. This was not a good idea to go into China. The Japanese said, well, maybe you're right. And this was not a good idea to go into China, so said, maybe you're right. Let's talk about it. So this took a discussion to a very different level. You understand what I'm saying? And they want to pull back from the brink. And these guys want to do it for and basically they all have the same reason. There's no reason for America to go to war, and the only one who will win is Russia. That's what they're thinking. Strauss sees that there's will in Tokyo for repairing relations. It will require work. It's doable, though. He tells Herbert Hoover, who's very excited, and they say if Roosevelt approves, then they'll negotiate with the Japanese for a totally fair settlement. It's a question of spirit, the atmosphere, more than anything else. And that's very often the case in international relations. Not always, but very often. The two priests go to Japan on their own, and they draw up proposals, which, if you look very closely, it says like this: Matsuoka returns to Japan, a peace proposal from the U.S., American recognition of Manchuria, merging of Chang's government with the Japanese recognized government, withdrawal of Japanese troops from China, mutual respect for independence, Japanese immigration will proceed on the basis of equality with other nationals and no discrimination, A base negotiation was for Honolulu, and so on and so forth. Now, the truth is, some of those things were non-starters, but that's how it goes when you start a proposal, correct? Some are lawyers here, you understand? This was what we would call today the beginnings, okay? And Strauss himself said, this is far from perfect, but to start, let's work with something. The Japanese were totally prepared to withdraw from Indochina. They were less prepared, but maybe, to withdraw from China and other things they wanted to handle with. In other words, it's a negotiation. I'll say it again. If it was Teddy Roosevelt, there'd be no question that they worked something out. But it was Franklin Roosevelt. And Roosevelt said, oh, no, you're like Chamberlain at Munich. You're appeasing the dictators. And I can understand that too, and so can you. Right? If you're letting Czechoslovakia go down, or in this case China or somebody else, so you're just encouraging the Japanese. He saw it very differently. You get it? He saw it that if you give them one, they'll take two. Give them two, they'll take four. So for understandable reasons, he conflated the Japanese with the Germans. You understand? And they were allies, and you can hear it. And so Roosevelt said, no way. Strauss said like this. Strauss, he said, yesh l'chalak. It's not the same thing. Japan is one situation. Germany's another. I know them both. You know them both. It's not the same thing. But that's not what happened. Well, if there's not going to be a peace talk, and there's not going to be any backing off by America, and Japan is not going to have any access to oil whatsoever in a little while, because they're going to run out of oil, they're going to have to go to war. You understand? To acquire Indonesia in order to get the oil. That's plain and simple. The alternative is they'll have to totally give in to American demands, break the treaties with Hitler, reorient their foreign policy, withdraw from every, all that kind of stuff, which is fine with me, but you can see it's not going to be started with them. And so Strauss shrugs his shoulders, sadly. He said, okay, this is not going to work. I'm joining the Navy because there's going to be a war. And he becomes number 2 to Forrestal, who is the undersecretary and eventually the secretary of the Navy. Okay? And Strauss will have he'll become Admiral Strauss, and he will have a very important career in the United States Navy administration in World War II, even though it's a war that he doesn't want to fight. Meaning, he's going to fight it, but if it was up to him, this was avoidable. But he doesn't go around saying it. From then on, as you can see what I'm saying, war was inevitable. It's just a question of when and where. Okay? It's just a question of when and where. And Admiral Yamamoto was famous for saying, I'm sure many of you know this, he says, don't hit the Americans over in the Philippines or something like that. It's too far away. Got to hit them where it counts. I'm against the war. Yamamoto's like, I'm against the war altogether. We're not going to win. And, I do the numbers. America has so many factories. We have so many factories. They have so much production capacity and population. We have this. We're not going to win. But the most you can hope for is a Russian-Japanese war. Give them a bloody nose, sink the Navy, and then sue for peace. And we'll end up with face Indonesia or something like that. So, it's something along those lines. And by the way, he said like this, that's the best case scenario, and you can't count on it. And if you ask me, I'm against it. But the emperor and the other big shots said, we're doing this, and since we're doing this, we want you to figure out the best way to do it. He said, the best way to do is to bomb Pearl Harbor, because that's where the fleet is. The Americans not going to expect it. And the carriers are there, and it's in the rear, and it'll be a devastating blow to America. And so it's a question of when and where. For Roosevelt, figured like this. He had a contempt, he'd say, for the Japanese military capabilities. This had to do with the racism. Roosevelt and the others used to say like this, the Japanese planes fly on chewing gum. Now that's ridiculous, but I'm just telling you the way it is. And everybody knows that Japanese, all they do is they imitate, and they used to be famous for selling cheap toys that fall apart. Not today, but yesteryear. And so what do you want from that kind of a Navy and that kind of an Air Force? So he was crazy. So let the Japanese attack us if they dare, and we're going to be invincible. Nothing to worry about. And anyway, if they attack, like in the Philippines or Guam or some faraway place, big deal. You know what I mean? You give us an excuse, and it won't have any real impact on America proper. He didn't count on Hawaii. Never thought about it. He figured they wouldn't dare to do that. And to be perfectly honest, Roosevelt, who considered himself the great strategist, which sometimes he was and sometimes he wasn't, did a really dumb thing. I'm just talking from a military point of view, but putting the Navy in Pearl Harbor. The admirals told him don't do it. And he fired the Admiral Richardson who told him not to do it. So the other guy didn't say nothing. You keep the Navy as far away. from the Japanese as possible. The Navy would be in San Diego or San Francisco. They couldn't come close enough to do it. If you stick them all out here, it's like putting a candy in front of a baby or something, you know. And so that's where things are holding when you get to November of 1941. And now we come back to our friend Ella Zacharias, who now is out of the Naval Intelligence. That Jewish officer I said yesterday, he was commanding a ship, but he smells trouble coming. And though he listens to the Japanese waiters in the restaurants in Honolulu, you understand? He sees the body movements, and you know he knows the Japanese, though he doesn't have access to the intelligence because he's out of it, and he certainly doesn't know about the magic breaking the Japanese code, because under Roosevelt, the forerunner of the NSA, the forerunner, had broken the Japanese code. But he said like this: I don't know that stuff. I know the Japanese. It's a different sort of intelligence. And he's obsessively studied the Japanese Navy and its officers. He knows personally, I told you yesterday, he played poker. He knew Yamaguchi and Yamamoto and Gumo and all these other guys. And he said like this: I can intuit their plans. And you won't believe this, he's like this: based on this and based on that, everything I see, they're going to hit Pearl Harbor December 7th, 1941. You understand? It'll be the first Sunday of December. It's amazing. And he wrote this to the commander who he knew, the commanding officer, Admiral Kimmel, in Pearl Harbor. And he said, I'm just telling you this, but obviously the Navy guys in general say, you can't go by, in Yiddish they call it a beichsvar. You understand? Now, just because you feel it in your stomach. You can't go like that. And they wouldn't even give him the time of day, except that when the Japanese ambassador passes through Hawaii on his way to Washington, Admiral Nomura, who's the guy who's going to be there at Pearl Harbor and giving the note to Roosevelt, Admiral Nomura said like this: where's my good friend Zacharias? I want to schmooze with him. You understand? And they bring Zacharias to Honolulu to talk with Admiral Nomura, and they have a whole talk, and Admiral Nomura says, basically like in Yiddish, oy vey, was wird sein? What's going to be between the two countries? And Zacharias said, I see what's happening. In other words, when he was speaking of Japanese to another guy, he said, I just feel very depressed what's happening. Well, you don't have to be a genius to figure out what he's talking about, but you can be obtuse like the Navy and not pay attention to it. And as we all know, of course, the warnings didn't work, and they did bomb Pearl Harbor as a complete intelligence fiasco. You know this. It was a complete surprise, and it resulted in the sinking of many American battleships and other warships. I don't even have to put that up. I know everybody knows that. And at the same time, the Japanese attacked the Philippines, invaded it, same time, and Indonesia, and Malaya, and many American other islands were surprise attacked and conquered, like within a few days. And the fat was in the fire. But it's where the obtuseness comes in. In reality, Pearl Harbor was a terrible failure for the Japanese. Okay? I'll tell you why. Number one, they didn't get the carriers, and that's all that counted. It just was a mazel from the Americans. Bismarck famously said there's only one explanation. There must be an angel in heaven that watches out for drunks, insane people in the United States of America. You see? Because, why don't drunks always run in front of cars? And that's what Bismarck was saying, So it so happens the carriers were out on exercise, and some were on their way to Wake Island under Halsey, and for a certain reason or another, so the planes came and they only bombed the old ships. They blew up a bunch of battleships, but to be ruthlessly honest about it, the battleships isn't what counts in World War II. You get what I'm saying? I mean, it's a tragedy, and I'm not making light of it and all the rest of it. And, I'm sure many people here know the ships turned upside down. These guys suffocated. It was a terrible thing. But I'm talking about from the pure military point of view, the ruthless calculation. They didn't get the main ships they wanted. Number two, they did not destroy Pearl Harbor. They didn't destroy the dry dock and the naval infrastructure. It's very famous. They didn't have the third wave, as they call it. They gave it one time and 2 times. They did it a third time to do it right. And if you didn't do it right, then it's a pinprick. You understand? Instead of smashing Pearl Harbor and turning it useless for the Americans, which would have been a blow, they didn't touch Pearl Harbor. They just sank a couple of ships, which is bad, but the ichor they didn't handle. You understand? It's actually remarkable. So as soon as the Japanese left, the Navy set about repairing the ships. The harbor was there. The infrastructure was there. The dry docks were there. The repair facilities were there. They had to bring in a few extra guys from stateside within a week or so. The place was humming again like it had been in the first place. And finally, and most importantly, in the obtuseness, the attack took place before the declaration of war. I'm sure people have read about this or seen this. But if you don't, I'll tell you. The way the Japanese planned it was as follows. And again, remember, Roosevelt was squeezing them. That's a fact. They said, listen, we're negotiating, but it's got to the point where we see America is not going to sell us any oil, and they're really going to squeeze us and try to kill us. Therefore, we're breaking off negotiations, we're declaring war. And then it was supposed to be that was on Sunday morning, and then they would go back to the embassy, and then like a half hour later or 45 minutes later, the planes will bomb Pearl Harbor. And then it would be, we did our part, we followed the halacha, we declared war, and then we were zrizim makdim l'mitzvahs. We went right away and we bombed them. So that's bad enough, but at least you fulfilled the basic obligation between states of civilized behavior. Because of certain snafus, which does happen, for certain reasons, it didn't happen that way. By the time the message came to the embassy, the Japanese had already bombed Pearl Harbor. So you had a situation in which the ambassador and the other Japanese guy came. They didn't even know they bombed Pearl Harbor. Roosevelt got a message. He said, the Japs are bombing us right now. What are you talking about? We're not even at war. And then a half hour later, an hour later, the Japanese come and say, like this, we want to announce that we're at war. So it looked like such a treachery. You understand? It's such a Japanese thing, as they would say. It provoked a huge anti-Japanese racism for 100% understandable reasons, which was completely counterintuitive. Why do I say that? What was the strategy, the best case scenario for Japan in World War II, Lishitasam, according to the way they thought? The best possible case they could come up with is they'll defeat America, sink their navy, and then make a peace with America. You get it? If you want to make a peace with somebody, you have to do it in such a way that they don't hate you. We just like you say in the word, this is business, it's nothing personal. You understand? We need Indonesia, we need the oil, it's business. And it didn't happen like that. If I come and stab you in the back, or your son or your daughter, you understand? Then what do I say? I say, I will never rest. I will never rest until I get you. You understand? The treacherous nature of this is there, and it was totally counterintuitive. And now, with that in mind, take a look in a second at Roosevelt's famous speech. I'm sure many people have seen parts of it, where he said, "Day will live in infamy." But I want you to listen. I have like a 4-minute piece. Notice, because he was a genius at communications. I think everybody knows Roosevelt was the greatest communicator. I believe. I think most historians would agree with that. You can like his policies, you can dislike about it, but getting it across, and he was a genius at simple but highfalutin language. I'll say it again: simple but highfalutin language. And he was a genius, and the Pearl Harbor speech was famous. You'll hear what he said like this. He says, "They were treacherous. It was a day lived in infamy. This was dastardly. Never will the American people forget the character of the act committed against us, and never will we let go until we make sure that we get these guys, and they'll never be in a position to do it again." Which means it's the opposite of the Russian-Japanese way. They say, we're going to the end. Okay? Take a look at this. Is Roosevelt, the day after Pearl Harbor, going to Congress to ask for war. Make it a little louder. Can we make it louder? That's it. Listen to the words.
Vice President, Mr. Speaker, members of the Senate, of the House of Representatives, yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy, the United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. The United States was at peace with that nation, and at the solicitation of Japan, was still in conversation with its government and its emperor, looking toward the maintenance of peace in the Pacific. The attack yesterday on the Hawaiian Islands has caused severe damage to American naval and military forces. I regret to tell you that very many American lives have been lost. In addition, American ships have been reported torpedoed on the high seas between San Francisco and Honolulu. As Commander-in-Chief of the Army and Navy, I have directed that all measures be taken for our defense. But always will our whole nation remember the character of the onslaught against us.
Treachery.
No matter how long it may take us to overcome this premeditated invasion, the American people in their righteous might will win through to
Absolute victory.
I believe that I interpret the will of the Congress and of the people when I assert that we will not only defend ourselves to the uttermost, but will make it very certain that this form of treachery shall never again endanger us.
That's enough. Okay, Jim. If you want to see the rest, you can look on yourself. And as you see, a very great speech. But you get my point, I hope, which is, it's not the Russian-Japanese War. They picked the wrong guy in the wrong time, in the wrong place, and the wrong way to do it. Roosevelt was actually laying it out. He says like this. He didn't mention anything about the oil embargo. He didn't mention about that. He said plain and simple, we are peace. They attacked us without any warning. This is who we're dealing with, and we're going all the way. We're going all the way. In other words, we're going to destroy Japan. So the Japanese attack on America was fundamentally misconceived. And there was not going to be Russia of 1904. And why didn't they see it? This is part of cultural obtuseness. You just got to get used to it. It's what makes history interesting. It's the history studies the weirdest of all creatures, the human being. And man is capable of great genius and also great stupidity. And it doesn't matter how high or low you are. It's kind of interesting, at least to me. Now, I'm not going to give you the Second World War. I want to make a couple of points. Another terrific Japanese mistake they made in the war. Remember what I said before. The idea was to hit America and then make peace. So what's with the brutality to the Americans? That's a way to win friends, right? Look what this is not Auschwitz. It's American POWs. I think some of you know about the Bataan Death March and even not that, the regular, these are storm prisoners of the Japanese by the time the Americans liberated them. Look at that. And the Americans looked at it. Do you think the Americans will say like Teddy Roosevelt, oh, let's make a peace, and win and lose an island here or there? Or are they going to do like Roosevelt? We will make sure get these guys no matter what. So in general, the Japanese brutality, which is a major part of who they were in the Second World War, was totally counterintuitive, counterproductive. If they're planning to have a war in the old-fashioned way in which we have a few battles and then we make a peace, then how are you going to behave this way? They didn't do this in the Russian-Japanese War, by the way. They treated Russian prisoners good. You know that? It's interesting. They treated Russian prisoners fine in the Russian-Japanese War. For some reason, the worst elements in the army command, there wasn't the generals, the guys under them, the worst, most brutal aspects of the Japanese nature came out. And all during the war, they did this kind of stuff, which, again, in their mind, they must have thought, gee, we're macho. We're showing them we're going to scare the other side. Actually, it's the worst thing they could do for themselves. You understand? It's the worst thing to do themselves. If you're fighting a small, defenseless people, then it just means you're a sadist. If you're fighting a big, non-defendable people, you're stupid. Okay? And they did this, by the way, to the Marines, when they fought the Marines in World War II. That's a big mistake. All they did was turn the Marines in Guadalcanal and these other places into no prisoners, pull the gold teeth from the dead Japanese, cut their faces open. Everybody brings home, I don't know if you noticed, they brought home noses, ears, things like that, because they said the Japanese catch our guys, and they slice them and dice them and roast them and toast them. We'll do the same thing. You understand? In other words, what's the point of brutality if you're just going to make the other guy double as brutal as you are? But they didn't see it. When they caught somebody in one of these islands, I can't even say what they did today, but some of you may know, it was just terrible. Then the Marines see it, you understand, the Army sees it. What's the plan? You understand? What's the plan? Now, so what chance was there going to be that there's going to be a negotiated peace? Secondly, in a military sense, the Japanese misconceived the naval war. The USA, as soon as Pearl Harbor started, this was Roosevelt's genius. He could mobilize the whole country and got the productive capacity going. If you know anything about World War II, we made a lot of mistakes, but FDR knew it, and he said, that's what happens. You make mistakes till you get it right. And they put together all the factories, and this worked, and this didn't work, and that worked, and that didn't work. And eventually, they got it out, and when they got it out by late 43, oh my goodness, we're turning out thousands of planes and dozens of carriers, and then the Japanese are in big trouble. The U.S. started turning out tens of carriers, thousands of planes. The Japanese, to the end of the war, thought, like in the old days, there's going to be a giant naval battle that they would win. And then a beaten America, deprived of its fleet, would agree to negotiate a peace. Instead, as many know, at the Battle of Midway, Spruance sunk the 4 carriers and they got out of there before the main fleet could come. That's one of the famous things. We destroy what we want to destroy and then run away. And so Admiral Yamamoto came after the Battle of Midway saying, where's the fleet I want to destroy? And Nishta. That's not fair. Yeah, it's not fair if you're holding by Admiral Mahan, back in the 1890s. Plus, this is even more astonishing. The Japanese never changed their codes. And somebody knows from the beginning of World War II, the Americans read the code. It never occurred to them. It's this culture. I keep coming back to that over and over again. People are prisoners of their culture. They can't get out of it. Every country has its own. Listen, we Americans have our Michigassen. No question about that. We have plenty. I'm talking about the Japanese ones over here. On the other hand, now listen closely. The Axis powers were not stupid. There was a certain strategy, and it might have worked. And I'll tell you what it's based on. They figured, and they were not wrong, democracies have certain weaknesses. Particularly, they cannot take big casualties. You understand? Not in World War II, not in Vietnam, not even today. Theoretically, America had a lot more people in Japan. And so we should be able to say like Russia, 10 million, 20 million, who cares? We're not built that way. It's not who we are as a people. We have a different value system, and we just see it's our culture. We see the world differently. The public will not stand for large casualties. If that had started to happen, there would be a big move to put an end to the war. Hitler counted on that. The Japanese counted on that. And it wasn't a crazy idea. As you know, the Germans killed millions, many, many millions of Russians. If they ever came close to anything like that in America couldn't take it, even though we're big. Furthermore, and this is going to be fun, America won't put up with too much discomfort. It's just a Messias. You understand? People in this country, we're not really going to take a big cut in their standard of living. You say World War II, all the rest of it. They're willing to make some, but not us. I just found this today. This is great, or yesterday. From the government put up a thing. What does the housewife do in World War II? Nebuch to cope with the terrible shortages. This is great. Take a look at this. The suffering Americans.
This is Amanda, and she's been dreaming of a new pair of shoes. Wouldn't she look just swell wearing those? But like all of us these days, Amanda has a dilemma when making purchases. It's no longer a matter of just having the money, but do you have the ration coupons? You see, the ration coupons, we make sure there's enough for everyone to last the duration, especially our boys overseas. What's that? You think you have enough coupons to get the shoes? Well, let's have a look and see. Well, you
You surely have a wide as open coupon there. But let's see if you have enough of the right kind. No, I'm afraid those coupons aren't for shoes. That one's for meats and fats. You see, the production of meats and fats takes materials and land, and feed required for the animals. And of course, we all know there's a shortage of manpower just now. That means fewer cattlemen to manage the herds, fewer rangers to tend the chickens and pigs. You see, the ration points are designed to make sure that in these times of shortages, everyone gets their fair share. But more importantly, they make sure that our boys overseas get 3 squares a day. After all, hungry GIs don't win wars. Let's see what else you have. Now that's also a food ration coupon, but in this case, it's for dried and processed foods. In many ways, processed and dried foods are the best value for your dollar. They have a shelf life that's practically infinite. That means less waste due to spoilage. And as we all know, waste puts victory right into the hands of the crowds. No, I'm afraid those are for coffee. You know, coffee comes from South America, and that means shipping. More shipping coffee for you means fewer GIs shipped to the South Pacific to take on those Tojo stooges. Nope, that one's for sugar. Now that one is for tires. You see, when the Japs attacked Pearl Harbor, they also captured American rubber plantations in Asia. This means that every bit of rubber must be saved for Jeep tires, watertight gaskets on submarines, and many other uses. That is a very important coupon. Perhaps the most important of all, gas. Battleships don't steam, bombers don't fly, and tanks don't chase Jerry out of France without fuel. Never buy more than you need. That puts Hitler in the driver's seat. Now you have it. That's a shoe ration coupon. Shoes need to be rationed too, because all the materials used to make shoes also make holsters, belts, and boots for our boys. That means a pair of shoes back here at home need to last. Months in, get to be friends with your local cobbler. Well, how many do you have? And how many points are the shoes? Oh, that is too bad. I guess you'll just have to wait a few more months for that pair of shoes.
I can't forbear to tell you the end. I was going to put the whole thing up. I told Howard, put the whole thing up. He said, don't put the last minute. She ends up spending her money on a bikini. Now, here's the point I want to make. Can you imagine if they ever showed this in Russia or in England or in China or in Japan during the war in Germany? I mean, this is a starving American, you know. And she's, oh, Nebuch, I can't get another pair of shoes over here. Look at the house she lives in. Look at you know what I'm saying, right? The world can't imagine. So theoretically, the Americans should be able to put, Roosevelt knew very well, the politician knew. If you don't allow a basic, standard, people will clamor for the end of the war. It's who we are. You understand? And the amazing thing is, as you see from the picture, even the so-called privations, and I'm not making too much fun of them, just a little bit, it's very doable. Agree? It's very doable. And to be perfectly honest, you had a black market. So she probably bought her shoes on the black market. Now, that's what happens. The government was fighting the black markets in World War II, and then life went on. So what I'm trying to say is that the Axis powers realized if the war went on for too long and the casualties got too heavy, the public would clamor for an end, just like happened in Vietnam in our time. You'd start to see mothers and things saying enough is enough and make a peace and get it over with. In the case of Hitler, by the way, if the war would have lasted another year, we would lose because he had the miracle weapons. People just don't remember. By 1945, he had jets. We're just starting. And that's when the Americans came in, just when the jets started to be coming offline. Imagine if D-Day had failed, which was very possible. Okay, Hitler would get an extra year. We wouldn't be able to invade in 44. They'd have to go in 45 at the best. And if we had a lot of casualties, then Roosevelt wouldn't get elected in 44. A lot of different things would have happened. And meanwhile, he would have jets and we wouldn't have jets. And then they could destroy everybody. So now you get into the what ifs. Where's Mr. Markowitz? He's into the what ifs. Yeah, right. So we wouldn't know. They have the jets. We have the atomic bomb. Which would trump which? It ain't push it. It's not push it. That's what you say. It's not push it. So because you can't deliver the atomic bomb if they shoot down all the planes. Anyhow, whatever the case is, you see where I'm going. So Roosevelt and Churchill had to fight the war with number one, Zrizas, which means you get there as fast as you can, as quickly as possible. It didn't happen overnight. It took a couple of years, but it's really as quickly, but there's no time to waste. And number two, acceptable casualties. You can only go with acceptable casualties. If D-Day had failed, look, there's a message from Eisenhower he planned to publish if it failed. He wrote two nusachs, you understand? One is we won. No, I'm serious. One is we won. Look at the other one. He said, it's my fault. If any fault attaches, it's mine, which is a good thing to say because I was the boss. You understand? So whatever the case is, if there was no atomic bomb, Japan might have escaped defeat, as we'll see. So what I'm trying to say is it's not crazy that they took on America. It wasn't foretold or, sure that we're going to invade and conquer all the rest of them. If it gets too high, the casualty rates, or it's too expensive in whatever way you're talking about, the public would say you do something about it. Now, there were millions of Japanese soldiers on the Asian continent. To defeat them would have been impossible given the domestic American political reality. We could not have landed an army in China and fought and lost. They lose 1 million, we lose 1 million. They lose 2 million, we lose 2 million. It doesn't work like that. Chiang Kai-shek was in charge of China, but he was a jerk. As soon as World War II started, he said like this. The Americans sent General Stilwell and said, "No, fight." And he basically said like this: "I don't have to fight anymore because I know America's going to win in the end, so I'm not going to waste a single soldier." You get it? Let them do this when the wars will have an army to fight the communists. And Stilwell said, no, fight the Japanese. So if we were to get involved in a land war, the casualties situation being crazy, because we're not going to have a World War I again where you have the Battle of the Somme and you lose 100,000 people in a week and things like this. So what are you going to do? What to do? This was the great American dilemma. However, the answer was the U.S. Navy. Okay, if you know anything at all about the Pacific War, they didn't need the Army a bit. The Navy said, and they meant it, and they were 100% right. They said, get the Army out of here. We have nothing to do with them. Just leave it totally to us. We'll defeat the Japanese. All we want is the British, the Army, get off our backs. This is really true. And the Navy did amazing things. Leave it all up to us and we can do it. Here are the two famous commanders of the Navy after Pearl Harbor. And, maybe people know, maybe not. These are the guys who won the war in the Pacific. That's Nimitz. And in a second, you'll see Admiral King. Admiral King was the head of the whole Navy, and Nimitz was the guy in charge of the whole Pacific War. There's King and Nimitz. There's Admiral Spruance, who won the Midway battle. These guys, not so well known, they beat the Japanese, plain and simple. And they did it with a certain tactic. And the tactic simply is using economy and common sense and the American way. And it's called the island hopping. And I don't think you necessarily understand what it is. Take a look at this map closely. Here's what Japan conquered and had millions of soldiers throughout here. I'll say it again. Several million Japanese soldiers throughout over here. Now, one way to fight them was like the army. Go here, beat them 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 here, and then go to Japan. By the time you do that, you lost the army. You understand? I mean, in other words, that'd be impossible. So the Navy said like this: let them all sit and roast. Leave them alone. Go up this way. See what I'm doing? Go up this way. There's the Solomon Islands, that's Guadalcanal. There's the Gilbert Islands, that's Tarawa. Then the Marshalls. Then the Caroline Islands, that's Kwajalein. And then here's Saipan and then Tinian and Guam already. And here's Iwo Jima, thank you very much. And here's Okinawa, and here's Japan. You get it? And when you go on an island, there's not 1 million Japanese over there. It's a little island, okay? And it's all about air power. Notice they came up with this idea as a chap. And the chap was, we're turning geography in our favor. All these millions of soldiers are millions of soldiers who can't fight us. Do you get it? It's a godless. It's a guyness. These guys are all just sitting here. I'm not even talking about the fact that when they took one or two of these islands, they just bypassed them and then they starved. That's another thing. But by the time you get to 44, 45, there are these islands like Truk and other places where there were large Japanese garrisons, but the Americans simply went around them, surrounded the place, bombed them a few times, and then most of them starved to death. There's no food coming in. Yes, by the end of the war, 3/4 of them were dead from starvation. Okay? And so, now, I don't want to make light of this, but I'll say it again. The Navy, if it was up to Roosevelt, it was up just to the, to the guys in charge, it's just avoiding transporting air power, and it minimizes casualties. You just, capture an island, build airstrips there, get the CBs, set it up as a base, and then from those airstrips you can send it in farther. And to be perfectly honest, by the time you get to 44, for those who are war nuts, by the time you get to late 44, you didn't need the islands anymore. This country was amazing, and they built huge fleets, and then they built gigantic 300 and 400 ship supply fleets. So there were guys on ships for a year and a half. They never got off the ship. You understand what I'm saying? The world has never seen anything like this. The Navy did an unbelievable logistics thing in World War II. You could get on a carrier or a battleship, and they supplied you with everything from Coca-Cola and chewing gum to the aviation material and the bombs and the bullets and this and that, the other, to the underwear, to everything. You see, it's what they call supply fleets. Okay, so it really got to the point. Rarely you didn't even the island anymore. You understand? So it was, just a remarkable thing. Now, obviously, I'm skipping over a lot of bad battles that they had with the Japanese. But I'll say this: each island, and by the way, the Navy has its own army. It's called the Marine Corps. The Marine Corps belongs to the Navy. That's who they are. They're the Navy's army. That's why the Army historically is always trying to get rid of the Marine Corps. You understand? That's what they're trying to do. The greatest enemy of the Marine Corps in world history was Harry S. Truman, because he'd been a captain in the Army in World War I. I promise you. And when World War II was over, he said, let's abolish the Marine Corps, and they almost got abolished 3 or 4 times. So but in World War II, the Marine Corps expanded to 500,000 men, and they fought the battles of the Navy on these islands. Now, each island was a hell, okay? But nevertheless, they beat them. I found online, did I do this? Yeah, right. I found online, so they must have made like a series or something like this. Here's a speech from the Marine Corps commander, Puller, Chesty Puller, being a famous person, a speech he gives at the very beginning of World War II, right after Pearl Harbor, and you see the mentality of the Marines. It's a movie. It's a dramatization of some kind or other.
The uniform, well, Roman anchor emblem that you had earned will make the difference between freedom of the world and its enslavement. December 7th was quite a day at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. On the same day, December 8th, on the other side of the International Date Line, places called Guam, Wake, Malay Peninsula, Hong Kong, Philippine Islands were also attacked by the Army, Air Force, Navy, the Empire of Japan. Japanese are in the process of taking half of the world, and they mean to keep it with death from the air, land, and sea. Here is what the Japs are not expecting. United States Marine Corps. Never mind her. Nazis, Mussolini, Hitler is not going to be our job. Not until they can't whip without us. Pacific will be our theater of war. Marines will be battling with the Japs on tiny specks of turf that we have never heard of. Non-commissioned officers. You are the sinew and the muscle of the corps. The orders come from the brass and you get it done. Whenever this war is over, when we have swept upon the main islands of Japan and destroyed every scrap of that empire, the strategy will have been that of others. The victory will have been won by you.
That's enough.
Howard.
Yeah, like I say, if somebody wants to pursue it, they can. Goes on to say like this. So the answer is Pasha, kill all the Japanese. They said, yeah, just kill them all. So Each island that they went to was a hell. And I met many people here tonight, last night. So parents told me my father was in the Pacific and all that. But, and that's great, it really is. But they weren't fighting in the Marine Corps. That's somebody unusual because it was a hell. 120 degrees. It's the tropics, it's the equator. It's bugs like you never imagined. It never stops raining. So it's 120 degrees and it doesn't stop raining. There's a guy, Sledge, wrote a book a number of years ago, where he said, how would you like it to be 6 weeks where it didn't stop raining for a minute, so your shoes rot off and get welts on the body and you can never take your clothes off. And then the Japanese are coming, you understand? And then the behemoths, from the island. And then the greatest, in other words, it's inhuman conditions. And a lot of these people came out scarred for life, and I totally understand it. So these people all heroes, especially the ones who cracked up, because a lot of them crack up under the terrible pressure. And the Marines didn't hide it. They showed. Take a look. This is Tarawa, where the Marines landed. They thought they blew up the Japanese, but they didn't. And it turned out that there was no place you could dig a hole because it's a hard ground of atoll or something like that. And so you're just totally exposed. And you have to go through that for a week or so until they finally killed every last Japanese because none of them would surrender. And here, take a look at this. The Marines put this movie out during World War II.
These are Marine dead. This is the price we have to pay for a war we didn't want. And before it's over, there'll be more dead on other battlefields.
Again, okay, that's enough for my purposes. And by the way, that was the only time they showed a movie like that, because all of a sudden, when they showed that movie, the enlistment for the Marine Corps went down. But anyhow, realistically, though, there weren't too many islands. I mean, I'm not making light of this. You understand what I'm saying. Not at all. But it wasn't an endless thing. Therefore, the casualty is acceptable. So they lost a few thousand men in Guadalcanal, a thousand dead on Tarawa, 2,000 dead on Saipan, and so forth. Now, in America, these were considered gigantic numbers. That's what I'm going to get to. In Russia, it was called 2 o'clock, on a regular day. In Germany and Japan, the Americans weren't used to these kind of casualties. And so, but they said, listen, we just took over a whole island chain. We're not happy about the losses. And they tried their best with snafus to try to minimize. And like I say, if an island was going to be very fortified, they went around it. They did their best. The problem was General MacArthur. You understand? He was the Army. And so I guess the Army has to be a part of this, and I'm MacArthur, so he was the most self-centered guy I ever lived. So he says, the war has to be. They should. He really said this. He said, forget the war about Hitler. The Iker place is here in New Guinea. That's where the real battle is. And he insisted that the Army be given all the resources that he wanted, that they should fight the battles that he thought that they should fight. Do you have something on the next one? Yeah. He wanted to be able to land in the Philippines. In the Philippines in 1944. He wanted to make sure all the photographers are there. They see him coming back to the Philippines.
It's General MacArthur, who is returning to Leyte as he has promised.
After fighting off a group of Japanese sharpshooters on Leyte, First Sergeant Jack Werner is back on the secured beach, just in time to see General MacArthur land with the American Liberation Forces.
Dark sunglasses, pressed pants. Some of the soldiers are snickering. I can't believe it. Some of these soldiers have no respect. The general just strolls onto the beach and walks into the jungle. And that is the last I see of him.
All right, that's okay. Now I'm going to tell you something. In real terms, they could have let the Japanese have New Guinea, or 90% of it. Let them stay there. That didn't have any effect on the Marines going up to Japan straight up the way they did. General MacArthur said, no, I'm in charge of getting this Army sector. I need millions of men and this and that and the other. And they fought all these bloody battles and people got killed for nothing. And then when that was finally over, then he said to Roosevelt, he said, we got to go to the Philippines. I promise to come back. I shall return. And the Navy said, I guess, what do you got to do to the Philippines? Philippines over here. It's got nothing to do with what we're talking about. We go straight up to Japan. No, it's a national honor. If he said, Roosevelt, if you do this, you will betray the national honor. Roosevelt was electioneer. He said, all right, you do it. And McCarthy said, it won't be heavy casualties. Of course, they lost like 100,000 American soldiers. You understand, between Leyte and Luzon and all the rest of it. And 1 million Philippine casualties. And it was totally unnecessary. So war is shocking in this regard that sometimes the people put the ego. You understand? But he had to come back and walk through the water and all this kind of stuff. If not for him, the war would have turned differently. Now, I'm coming to the end. By mid-44, the Navy had cracked the Japanese island chains and was within sight of the home islands. So, in other words, by mid-44, June of 44, they're up to here. You can bomb. The planes can go from there. The Marianas, as they called it. That was the inner core of the Japanese island. The Japanese freak out, and they wise up. And they stopped the stupid banzai charges that they used to charge the Marines. And the Marines said, come to Papa. We have all the machine guns. They just kill them. You're helping us. And they said, instead, we're going to dig in and fight for every inch of the way to raise the American casualties. And it worked. Okay? So from late 44 on, the American casualties start to climb tremendously. Plus, as far as the invincible Navy, they come with the kamikaze, which actually is brilliantly simple. Look at this. One stupid plane can blow up a whole aircraft carrier. And you don't even have to be like you dropped your bomb. You just blow up into it.
The Japanese High Command turns to a desperate new tactic. On the 25th of November 1944, a lone Japanese bomber closes in on the USS Essex. Its pilot was part of a new force. Special Attack Corps, kamikaze.
Yeah, okay, that's it. And again, it's brilliantly simple. All you have to do is get a guy who's willing to do it, but the Japanese have guys who are willing to do it. One plane costs a few cents. A aircraft, you understand what I'm saying? And the Americans never developed a countermeasure on this in the whole World War II. So it's not what we think, that as the war got closer to the end, the Japanese got weaker and weaker and weaker. Actually, as the war got closer to the end, people don't realize the Japanese got worse and worse and worse. And in early 45 comes Iwo Jima and then Okinawa, in which the American dead and casualties went up the roof. You understand? We had 25,000 casualties, including 5,000 killed in Iwo Jima, which is a stupid little island, And then in Okinawa, it was like double that or something. Crazy numbers of killed. I'll repeat, not by German standards and not by Russian standards, not by Japanese standards, but by American standards. And the country said, "Oy, Gewalt, what's going to be if we have to go in Japan mamish?" You understand? We'll lose a zillion people over there. The Japanese say they'll never surrender. They make the Americans pay for every inch. They meant it. And the United States, as you get to the middle of 1945, is scared to death. And then Roosevelt dies, and Truman comes in, and what do you go? He's totally scared to death. He's brand new, and he says, what are we looking at? And what's going to help? Now, I know everybody's already mouthing to me, the A-bomb. You're going to see, I'm finished. You're going to see tomorrow. Tom, not what you think. You understand? Not what you think. Because I'll leave you with this question. What if you drop the A-bomb on them and they don't surrender? What do you do then? We're Americans. We think, oy, Gewalt, if they dropped something and blew up Newark, New Jersey, Spartansburg, South Carolina, it's a catastrophe. People will write books and all the rest of it. What if you drop them and they don't give up? Because I'm going to tell you now what you don't know, which is Japanese did not give up because of the atomic bomb. It's a common misconception. I'm very aware of it. It's remarkable. How can you be so callous at the loss of the lives of your own people? It's a different culture. And so the question is going to be, and then the Jewish angle will come in on this, how do you get the other side to admit they're licked without us having to lose 1 million men, which is a political impossibility? Okay? Maybe the Japs will be successful after all in getting a negotiated peace. Maybe. After all, they still have millions of men in Asia. You see? Don't go by post hoc ergo propter hoc. This is the way it was meant to be. It was very far from that, and it's a very complex story, but I'm done for tonight. And as always, we'll daven Ma'ariv in a minute.